The formal non-agricultural sector increased by 9,000 employees in the first quarter of this year. This from the December quarter last year, pointing to a 0.1% quarterly increase. Now, the number is reflected in the latest quarterly employment survey from Statistics South Africa. However, the increase in jobs has been accompanied by the decrease in overall earnings for those in formal employment. Gross earnings paid to employees during the quarter fell nearly 5%. But on an annual basis, earnings have increased by 7% in March. Now, Stats SA says its preliminary data shows that the mining industry saw a decrease of 29,000 jobs in March compared to the same period last year. The manufacturing and construction sectors also saw a decline in jobs in the 12 months to March. The increase in jobs came mostly from the finance and government sectors. Well, Mike Schussler, chief economist at economist.co.za, joins me now to make sense of the numbers. Mike, thanks for coming in.
Pleasure, Devon.
All right, so this survey basically tells us how we are doing in the economy as far as the formal sector is concerned in terms of jobs. An increase of 0.1% on a quarter-on-quarter basis. I would imagine that's hardly any movement. What do you make of that?
That's very little movement. If you just look at it, the bigger numbers, the government increased 50,000 jobs in the quarter. So if you look at that and you go back to the private sector, you have to say the private sector lost 41,000 jobs. And that's a problem because that's where your productivity and your productive parts, your exports and all that comes from. And just to put it in a different way, we'll get to mining now, but although we only saw a 2,000 decline in the numbers of people in manufacturing, we are only 2,000 away from a low point that will take us back to 1972.
That's what I wanted to talk about next. 3,000 jobs lost in the manufacturing sector. Here's a sector that the government says, hey, it's going to solve our unemployment problem. We've got to get that off the ground. It just doesn't look like there's any good scope coming to us.
No, I think at the moment, you know, if you look at what manufacturers have been doing, they've been mechanizing, they've been spending on capital. Even during when the rand was falling, they were buying new capital equipment to gear themselves up for better, to meet competition. But I think they're trying to meet it with less labor because they feel that the labor situation, job-wise, it's costing them a lot of money. They feel, but at the other end, South Africa is also starting to show a huge propensity to strike. We've just come through our longest strike in history. We've got more strikes to come probably this year. This year we've already lost 8 million days. It's the first time in living memory that I can think of any year where you haven't even got through 6 months where you've lost 8 million work days. So ultimately, you know, employers are having to make a plan and would rather concentrate on fewer employees getting better paid, but ultimately it's not good for the economy because it doesn't spread the wealth of the economy. And that is the problem in manufacturing and mining specifically.
Mike, you've spoken quite often about small business, about creating jobs in small business. When can we see those numbers, something positive in figures and stats like this?
Well, the first quarter of this year, there was a very big decline in the number of employers. I can't remember the figures at the moment, but data that we do for ABSA definitely shows that there's a decline in employers and a further decline in self-employment. And this is a very scary number as such. And the other thing that worries me is that although for a 3-month period liquidations are down, the trend is going to start moving in a different direction because in May alone, there was a 70% increase in the companies seeking liquidations. And that's not a good sign for our economy. And I think what we're having is that people are rejigging themselves. They'd rather liquidate their company as is and try to set up something else, very often with less labor.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into the mining now. I mean, as we speak, probably pen to paper pen's going to be put to paper. We're going to see an official end to this platinum strike. Just before the interview, I mean, you had told me that there's a 13% decline in nominal wages in the mining sector. What does that number really tell you?
Well, that number says to me, if I add inflation of, say, roughly 7% to it, it says there's a 20% real decline in the amount of money paid out to mining. And you can see that's due to the strike. Now, this is the second highest paid sector in South Africa. If we look at the labour force survey, if we look at other things, you know, in the broader sense, it's third highest, but it's one of the highest paid sectors. So obviously that's going to have a big knock-on effect into, say, retail or into car sales or whatever the case may be, because these are the guys that should be buying the stuff because they're earning our exports. And because of that strike, that's really showing you where the damage is being done on the labour side, where people get paid. And that's actually very frightening, because ultimately what we're going to see in the June quarter is going to be worse than in the first quarter. And overall, that's dragged our wages down. Normally we do get a bit of a fall in the first quarter because the last quarter of the year has bonus months, Christmas bonuses and the like. But a 5% nominal percentage fall, we hardly get.
Now let's just chat about the big question of retrenchments, which I said earlier to one of my colleagues is casting a shadow over the signing. Mike, Joseph Matunjwa comes up this morning and says there shouldn't, and he doesn't expect there to be retrenchments in the mining industry in the coming months. It just doesn't seem to make sense to me that you would have concessions being made on the part of the mining companies, and yet you wouldn't see them laying off any workers. What's your take on the issue of retrenchments?
Well, look, you only need to go into the actual mining figures right now. There's 15,000 jobs gone in these figures on one quarter. The mining is now at its lowest level since 2010. It's very likely that around about a third of the jobs in the platinum sector is going to disappear. The mines are going to go to the more mechanized eastern rim of the platinum belt, and there they do production, 340 Amplats mine, 340,000 ounces with 6,000 people. The other 40,000 people produce 500,000 ounces, that's true, but it means you need, roughly 6 times the people to get a 50% increase. That shows you it's going to go to mechanization soon.
Just a couple of seconds we've got left. Are you positive with the signing of this agreement today? Can this economy bounce back from that dreadful GDP figure?
It's going to take time. We will bounce back, there's no doubt, and we are an economy that does bounce back properly. But I think there are going to be areas such as Rustenburg and Maribeng and Pretoria Rural, Tabazimbi and rural Eastern Cape and so on, that's going to take years to come back. I think a lot of those retailers, a lot of those suppliers, they're not coming back, and I think we're looking at a situation where some things to return to more normal levels is probably not going to happen within the period of this agreement.
Mike Schussler from economist.co.za, thanks indeed for your time. Now, South African retail giant Woolworths has announced a bid to buy out Australian fashion chain Country